What's good, YouTube? And welcome to Pastry Playhouse TV. This week, we caked up some spaghetti. Let me show you how I did it. Okay, guys, to start off this cake, what we're gonna do is just take your cake and cut it in half just to give it a little more height. What I did was then add simple syrup, which is just half water, half sugar. You cook it down to about 220 degrees just to leave the cake nice and moist because nobody likes a dry cake. And once you're done doing that, let it sit for a little bit. You're going to add your filling. I chose a cream cheese filling right here, but you can add buttercream or ganache or anything else. And then after you sandwich the two pieces of cake together, you're going to go ahead and just start carving it. You're going to want to start carving it into a blob to give it more of a realistic look, just because spaghetti doesn't really have a shape. Okay, so now that you have the shape that you're looking for, you're gonna add your filling, your buttercream, your cream cheese filling, and you're just gonna go ahead and give it a crumb coat, which is just a super, super thin layer of buttercream or whatever filling you choose. And then you're gonna just go all the way around and just make sure the whole entire cake is completely covered in this thin crumb coat. Once the cake is completely covered in the crumb coat, you're going to put it in the fridge for a few minutes and let it chill. Then you're going to take some fondant and add a little bit of ivory food coloring to give it that off-white look. And you're just going to go ahead and add some cornstarch. I use powdered sugar in this one, but typically you add cornstarch to the tables just so the fondant doesn't stick. And you're going to go ahead and just knead the color into the fondant. Give it more of a realistic look. And then you're going to just continue to knead it until it gets to the perfect color. Right here, I was taking a look at it and I felt like it still needed a little bit more ivory. So I just added a few more pieces of the ivory food coloring and I just continued to knead it until it got to the perfect color that I needed. And I could start making my spaghetti. And now for this part, what you're gonna do is you're gonna wanna roll out that fondant pretty thin. With this fondant, what we're gonna do, we're actually gonna wrap it around the cake that you already put in the fridge, just so when you add the spaghetti to it, it doesn't have any holes. It all looks very cohesive. So once you cover the whole entire cake, you're going to want to take a knife and go ahead and cut all the excess fondant off of it. You're going to want to save that fondant that you do cut off because you can use it later for the actual spaghetti themselves. So now we're getting into the fun part. Now we're actually going to make this spaghetti. And for this part, you're going to need a clay extruder. You can see the tool that I used right there, the tip that I used. It had multiple holes just so you could make as much spaghetti as possible in a short amount of time. And that had the perfect size of thickness, how I wanted the noodles to be. So what you're going to do is just take some of that fondant and go ahead and just stick in your clay extruder. And you're going to go ahead and grab a piece of parchment. You don't need parchment. You can just put it on the table and just dust it with cornstarch or powdered sugar. And just go ahead and just squeeze all that fondant through that clay extruder to give it that good old pasta look. And what I learned from this is that the fondant, once you put it through that clay extruder, is going to be pretty sticky. So you'll see later on in the video that I actually started to put cornstarch in that actual clay extruder itself so the fondant doesn't stick to themselves. Right here is all a learning lesson. I went and started separating the fondant by hand to give it more of a realistic look. So you're just going to continue the process of just putting the fondant in a clay extruder and just continuously just pushing it out. You're going to want to roll out a bunch of spaghettis. So once you have all your spaghetti that you squeeze out of the clay extruder, now we're gonna go ahead and start adding it to the actual cake themselves. And this is where I said you needed the cornstarch in the actual clay extruder, because once you try to add it to the cake, you see the fondant wants to stick to itself and doesn't really want to separate like how spaghetti should. What I used was actually a Q-tip, just stuck it in between each individual spaghetti and try to make it more realistic, give it more life and a little more dimension to it. So you're just gonna continue the process of just putting the spaghetti all around the cake. Trust me, you're probably gonna have to roll out some more spaghetti if you don't have enough, and that's perfectly fine. But just continue the process of just wrapping around the cake, trying to give it some more space so it can go ahead and look as realistic as possible. As you can see right here, I had to do it a couple of times, just continue going back and forth. And then just take your fingers if you have to and just open up the spaghetti if it gets stuck to one another. That's perfectly fine. And right here, this is what I was saying, where I found out to put the actual powdered sugar or cornstarch in the actual clay extruder, just so when you push it out, it has each individual strand separated, not sticking to one another, hence giving that more realistic look that you're looking for. So once you have the cake completely covered in this spaghetti, now we're finally gonna get to work on the meat sauce. And here I just used 3 teaspoons of strawberry jam. I added some orange food coloring, some green food coloring, as well as some burgundy and some red. Give it more of a marinara look. You're just gonna add a few drops of each. The green, you're only gonna wanna really add like the tiniest drop. And you can just take a spoon and just mix it all together and lift it up and hold it to the sun just so you can see the light in it. Make sure, it's a color of marinara that you wanted. And once you find the perfect shade, now we're just gonna add some cake crumbs. You can use some of the cake that you had left over from once you started carving the cake, and you're just gonna go ahead and mix it all together. Mix it all together so you can't really see actual pieces of cake. You just wanna see the actual lumps. The lumps are gonna give it a meat marinara sauce type of look. And now that all the pieces of cake are fully incorporated, you're just gonna go ahead and scoop it on top of your cake. You don't wanna spread it out. Make sure that it gives it a little bit of a drip. Give it as much of a realistic look as possible. And now guys, we're gonna start making the meatball. You can make as many meatballs as you like. I only chose one for time purposes. But to make the meatball, you're gonna take some of your cake scraps and add some buttercream to it. And then once you make a ball with the cake scraps, you're gonna take some of your ivory fondant and just go ahead and wrap it all the way around so there's no cake showing through it. Once that's all done, you could go ahead and take a modeling tool. If you don't have a modeling tool at home, that is perfectly fine. I use a toothpick at certain points just to add a little bit of texture. Now, with the modeling tool or toothpick, you're just going to start making lines and poking it. Make as much texture as possible, because once you start adding color to it, you want the color to sit in those crevices that you made. I use some orange, some brown, and a little bit of yellow. And once you add the base coat, I went ahead and took some brown food coloring, add a little bit of water, just so that brown could really sit in those crevices that I made with my modeling tool. At this point, I started to add a little bit of black just to give it more of a charcoaly look to it. I added a few dots here and there just so once I added my paintbrush, I started poking it just to spread that black around so it doesn't look like a cheetah or anything like that. And you're going to want to go ahead and do that with a little bit of water just so the colors are just more or less saturated. And then once I was done with that, I went ahead and actually hit it once again with my airbrush, just so it had a base color and the other darker colors were able to seep into those crevices that you made. And once you get the color you like, you're just going to take your paintbrush over a few more times just to give it more of a texture look. And there you go. There's your amazing lasagna cake. Thank you, everybody who watched it. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you once again to everybody. Have a good one. See you in the next video.